My daughter-in-law shoved me off a yacht to steal $1 million. When they came home, I was waiting with my son, my only child, toasted to my health just moments before his wife shoved me from our family yacht into the black, unforgiving waters of the Atlantic. They left me for dead, believing my $1 million was finally theirs. They thought I was weak. They were wrong. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. To understand how I ended up in the ocean, gasping for air in the dead of night, you first have to understand the dinner that took place 1 week earlier. The air in our Miami Estates dining room was thick with the scent of salt water and night-blooming jasmine, a gentle breeze drifting in from the open terrace doors. Above our heads, the grand crystal chandelier shattered the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows on the polished mahogany table. It was a perfect Florida evening, or so it seemed. My son, Michael, sat across from me, the very picture of success in his tailored suit, his lawyerly charm turned up to its brightest setting. Beside him, his wife Sophie seemed delicate, almost fragile, under the weight of all that crystal and silver. I let the silence hang for a moment after the housekeeper cleared our main course plates. I cleared my throat, and both of them looked up, expectant. "I have some news," I began, my voice calm and measured. "The land deal in California has officially closed. The commission was wired this afternoon." Michael's face lit up with a practiced smile. "That's fantastic, Mom. Congratulations. I knew you'd pull it off." He raised his wine glass. "To the best real estate mogul in Miami." I offered a slight nod, not returning the toast. My eyes shifted to Sophie, who was nervously tracing the rim of her water goblet. "The commission," I continued, letting the words land with deliberate weight, "was $1 million. The air went still. Michael's smile widened, a predatory gleam in his eyes that he thought I couldn't see. $1 million, he breathed out. Incredible. Sophie just stared, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of awe and, perhaps, fear. She always seemed overwhelmed by the scale of our lives. "I've decided what to do with it," I said, folding my hands on the table. "I am not adding it to my primary estate. Instead, the money will go into a new, separate trust fund." Michael leaned forward. His interest piqued. "A new trust? For what purpose?" This was the moment, the test. "For your future," I said, looking directly at him. "Michael, you will be the primary trustee, managing the account." I paused, then turned my gaze to my daughter-in-law. "However, there is a condition. For any withdrawal, any transaction of any kind, Sophie will be the mandatory co-signer. Both of your signatures will be required." The perfect smile on Michael's face faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of annoyance crossed his features before it was expertly masked. Sophie looked as if I'd just asked her to pilot a rocket ship. "Me?" she stammered, placing her hand on her chest. "Mrs. Hayes, I wouldn't know the first thing about managing something like that. I couldn't possibly." "You'll learn," I stated flatly. It was not a suggestion. My hand instinctively went to the diamond phoenix brooch pinned to my silk dress, a gift from my late husband, a symbol of rebirth. The chandelier's light caught its facets, sending a single, sharp glint across the table, right into Michael's eyes. He didn't flinch, just resumed his role as the doting son. "Of course, Mom, whatever you think is best. It's a wonderful way to include Sophie in the family's finances." He reached over and placed his hand over Sophie's, a gesture that was meant to look reassuring but felt possessive. But I saw the look that passed between them, a fleeting, silent conversation I was not meant to understand. In that moment, under the glittering chandelier, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was a premonition, the first whisper of the storm that was about to break. I didn't know it at the time, of course. While I was in my study, reviewing the final details of the California deal, the real transaction was happening upstairs. Later, I would learn exactly how the poison took root, how my son's soft words became the devil's whisper in his wife's ear. They were in their bedroom, a space of cool grays and minimalist furniture that always felt like a hotel room to me, impersonal and temporary. Sophie was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands twisted in her lap. My son, Michael, knelt before her, taking her hands in his. He was a master of the concerned gesture. "Hey, look at me," he said, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "Don't let her get to you. I know my mother can be a lot." "It's not just that, Michael," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "A cosigner for $1 million? She doesn't trust us. She doesn't trust me." "I know. It's a game, Sophie. It's always a game with her," he said, stroking her hand. "She holds the purse strings, and she wants us to dance for her. She dangles this money in front of us, but it's not a gift. It's a leash." He let that sink in, watching her face. He saw the flicker of resentment, the validation she felt at hearing her own fears spoken aloud. He had his opening. "But what if it didn't have to be?" he continued, his tone shifting from comforting to conspiratorial. "What if this wasn't a leash, but a key?" He stood up and walked over to his nightstand, picking up his iPad. The screen glowed to life in the dim room. He sat down next to her, the cool light illuminating their faces. "Look," he said, swiping through a series of photos. The first was a stunning white villa with an infinity pool that seemed to melt into the turquoise sea. "Santorini. We could wake up to this every morning. No calls from the office, no board meetings, no mother." He swiped again. A sleek, modern house of glass and redwood perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. "Or Malibu. We could have a life of our own, Sophie. A real one, the kind we've always talked about." Sophie stared at the screen, mesmerized. These were the dreams they had whispered about late at night, the someday fantasies that felt a million miles away. "Michael, that's crazy," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We can't just take her money." "Her money?" Michael scoffed, but he kept his voice gentle. "Sophie, it's a drop in the bucket for her. She wouldn't even feel it. This is my inheritance. She's just making me jump through hoops for it. She's testing you, testing us. Don't you see? She wants to see if you'll fall in line." He put the iPad down and turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. "Think about it. $1 million. We could disappear. Start fresh. I could open a small practice by the beach. You could paint again. We could finally be free. No more walking on eggshells in our own home. The ball would finally be in our court." "But it's wrong," she said, her voice barely audible. "What's wrong?" he countered, his voice hardening just slightly. "Is living under someone else's thumb for the rest of our lives. What's wrong is letting her control our future. I'm tired of being her golden boy, Sophie. I just want to be your husband." He framed her face with his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Imagine it. Just us. No one to answer to. Isn't that what you want?" She didn't answer. She just looked from his intense, pleading eyes to the glowing screen of the iPad, where a perfect, sun-drenched life was waiting. He didn't need her to say yes. He just needed her to stop saying no. And in the silence of that room, as the seeds of greed and resentment began to sprout, she did. The next piece of the puzzle fell into place 2 days after that dinner. While I was overseeing the final preparations for my foundation's annual charity gala, my son was setting the next stage of his trap. I would only learn the details of this part later, pieced together from security footage and the blackmailer's eventual terrified confession. But I can picture it now as if I were there. Sophie was at a Starbucks on the edge of the city, the kind of generic, soulless place people go when they don't want to be seen. She was trying to lose herself in a book, a half-empty latte cooling on the small table beside her. Her phone buzzed. It wasn't Michael. It was an unknown number. The message was short, and it made the blood drain from her face. "I know what you did in Denver 5 years ago. Her hand trembled, rattling the ceramic mug against the saucer. Her past, the one she had run from, the secret she had buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it didn't exist, had just crawled out of its grave. She looked up, her eyes darting around the quiet coffee shop. A man in a baseball cap and sunglasses was watching her from a corner table. He gave a slight nod, then stood up and walked out. A moment later, her phone buzzed again. Outside. 5 minutes. Or your husband gets a very interesting email. Panic seized her. She fumbled in her purse, throwing a few bills onto the table before hurrying out into the humid Florida air. A black sedan was parked at the far end of the lot. The man from the coffee shop was leaning against it. As she approached, he opened the back door. "Get in," he said, his voice a low gravel. Inside the car, he didn't waste time. 5 years ago, Denver. A hit and run. A young man on a bicycle. You drove away, Sophie. You left him on the side of the road. Tears streamed down her face. "It was an accident. I was scared. Save it," he cut her off. "I have the original police report. The one that was lost. I have a witness who saw you. It's a shame your mother-in-law is so well respected. A scandal like this, it would ruin the family name." "What do you want?" she choked out. $250,000, he said calmly. A small price to pay to keep a ghost in its grave. When she finally stumbled back into her house an hour later, she was a wreck. Michael, of course, was there to catch her when she fell. He held her, let her cry, and listened to her frantic, garbled confession. He played the part of the shocked, supportive husband to perfection. It's okay," he soothed, stroking her hair. "We'll figure this out." "We can't," she cried, pulling away from him. "He wants $250,000, Michael. Where are we going to get that kind of money? We'll have to go to your mother." Michael's face hardened. "No, absolutely not. We can't tell her this. Do you have any idea what she would do? She'd throw you to the wolves to protect her reputation. We are not telling her." "Then what do we do?" Sophie pleaded, her eyes wide with desperation. "He's going to ruin us." Michael sighed, a deep, theatrical sound of a man burdened by the world. He started pacing the room, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I don't know, Soph. My accounts are tied up in investments. I could maybe liquidate some things, but it would take weeks, and he'd get suspicious. We're in over our heads here." He stopped and looked at her, a dawning, terrible idea seeming to cross his face. Unless what?" she asked, desperate for any sliver of hope. "The trust," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The $1 million. It's the only way. It's the only cash we can get our hands on fast enough to make this go away for good." He made it sound like the most tragic, unavoidable conclusion in the world. He made it sound like her only salvation. The suggestion came from Michael the next morning over breakfast on the patio. He was all smiles, the perfect image of a dutiful son trying to mend the tension from our dinner a few nights prior. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said, setting down his coffee cup. "This California deal is a huge win. We should celebrate. Properly." I raised an eyebrow over the rim of my teacup. "And what do you consider a proper celebration, Michael?" "The yacht," he said, his enthusiasm feeling a little too bright. "Let's take the Eleanor out for the day, just the three of us. We'll sail down to the Keys, have some champagne, enjoy the sun. What do you say?" Sophie, who had been silently pushing a piece of melon around her plate, looked up. Her eyes were wide, a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Fear? Passing through them before she looked down again. On the surface, it was a wonderful idea, a perfect family outing. But my instincts, honed by 40 years of navigating boardrooms filled with sharks, were screaming that something was wrong. Michael wasn't the sentimental type. He never suggested family outings unless he wanted something. Still, I saw my opening. This was the perfect stage. That sounds lovely, dear, I said with a placid smile. Let's do it tomorrow. The relief on his face was immediate and profound. He was like a child who had just gotten away with something. Great, I'll make all the arrangements. That afternoon, while Michael was busy making arrangements, and Sophie was likely trying to steady her nerves, I made a call of my own. I stepped into my private library, a room paneled with dark cherry wood, and closed the heavy doors. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It was answered on the second ring. Yeah, a gruff voice answered. No name, no greeting. That was Frank. Frank was a retired FBI agent who owed me a favor, a very big one, years ago. I had provided the anonymous tip that had helped him close a career-defining case. And in the process, I'd saved his daughter from a world of trouble. He was a man of few words and unshakable loyalty. Frank, it's me, I said, my voice low. I know, he replied. Everything all right, Eleanor? I'm not sure, I said, walking over to the window that overlooked the bay. I might be taking a flight soon, an unscheduled one. There was a pause on the other end. He understood my coded language perfectly. You think they're going to make a move? The conditions are right, I said simply. I want you to be ready, just in case. The tracker is active. I'll be watching, he confirmed. Just give the signal. I looked down at the phoenix brooch I had pinned to my blazer. I will, I said, my voice firm. The phoenix will fly tonight. I didn't say tonight. I meant tomorrow, but it was part of the code. It meant the plan was in motion. Understood, he said, and the line went dead. The next day, the sun was brilliant. The sky a perfect cloudless blue. The marina in the Florida Keys was a picture of obscene wealth, with gleaming white yachts bobbing gently in the turquoise water. Michael was already on board the Eleanor, playing the gracious host, a bottle of champagne already chilling in a silver bucket. The moment we left the harbor, the smooth jazz started playing through the boat's sound system. The sea was calm, the definition of smooth sailing. Michael poured us all a glass of champagne, his smile never leaving his face. To family, he said, raising his glass. And to new beginnings. I clinked his glass, my eyes on Sophie. She was a ghost, dressed in a beautiful white sundress. She looked as pale as a sheet, her knuckles white as she gripped the stem of her untouched champagne flute. She stared out at the endless blue water as if it were an abyss. I took a small sip of my champagne, the bubbles fizzing on my tongue. The sun was warm on my skin. The sea breeze was gentle, but a cold knot was tightening in my stomach. I reached up and unconsciously touched the cool metal of the phoenix brooch on my dress. It was a small, solid weight against my chest. A silent promise. I was ready for whatever was coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange, pink, and gold. The air grew cooler, the sea turning from a bright turquoise to a deep, intimidating navy. We had been sailing for hours. The champagne bottle was empty, and the forced pleasantries had long since died out, leaving a thick, heavy silence in their wake. Michael stood at the helm, steering us further and further from the distant shoreline. He looked completely at ease, one hand on the wheel, the other in his pocket. A picture of calm control. He was waiting for the perfect moment. The perfect audience was a vast, empty ocean. Sophie was a different story. She sat huddled on one of the cushioned benches, wrapping her arms around herself as if a bitter wind had picked up, though the air was perfectly still. She hadn't said more than 10 words all afternoon. Her face was a mask of sheer terror. She looked like a cornered animal, and I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that she was about to do something desperate. I stood by the railing at the stern, watching the frothy white wake of the yacht stretch out behind us. I was watching them both in the reflection of the cabin's polished glass. I saw Michael turn his head slightly, his eyes meeting Sophie's. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The signal. It was time. The die was cast. Sophie stood up on shaky legs. She looked at Michael, then at me, her expression a chaotic mess of fear and resolve. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. "Mrs. Hayes," she began, her voice a thin, reedy thing that the breeze almost carried away. "Eleanor." I turned to face her fully, my expression unreadable. I did not help her. I did not make it easy. I wanted to see if she would go through with it. I wanted to look into the eyes of the woman my son had chosen to be his accomplice. "Sophie," I said, my voice even. "Is something wrong?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her pale cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. It was a pathetic, hollow sound. She was apologizing for what she was about to do, not for the decision she had already made. She closed the distance between us. She was close enough now that I could smell the salt and fear on her. Her hands came up, trembling violently. For a moment, I thought she might lose her nerve, that some shred of decency might win out. But then her eyes flickered past me, towards Michael. He was watching, his face a cold, impatient mask. He had pushed her to the edge, and now he was waiting for her to jump. Her gaze snapped back to mine. In that final second, I didn't see a monster. I saw a weak, terrified girl who was in far over her head. I saw the pawn my son had so expertly maneuvered into position, and as her hands made contact with my shoulders, the primary emotion I felt was not anger, but a profound, soul-crushing disappointment. This was the legacy I was leaving behind, a son who would use a broken girl to commit murder. The push itself wasn't violent. It was a desperate, panicked shove. My balance was gone. The world tilted crazily, a blur of golden sky and dark water. The last thing I heard as I fell backward into the abyss was Michael's perfectly rehearsed scream. "Mom!" It was a masterful performance, full of shock, anguish, and a son's love. It was a complete and utter lie. A funeral, I've always believed, is for the living. It's a performance of grief, a public spectacle to convince the world and perhaps oneself that a life mattered. My funeral was no different, except for two small details. There was no body, and the chief mourner was my murderer. From what Frank later showed me on the news clippings and the society pages, it was a grand affair. Michael had booked the largest, most ostentatious cathedral in Miami. He spared no expense. The pews were filled with the city's elite, business partners, rivals, political figures, all there to see and be seen. He had my favorite white orchids flown in from Hawaii, thousands of them, their cloying, sweet scent filling the cavernous space. It was a production worthy of Hollywood. Michael, naturally, was the star of the show. He was the very picture of grief, dressed in a somber, impeccably tailored black suit. He stood at the entrance, accepting condolences with a grave, heartbroken expression. He'd shake a hand, accept a hug, and wipe away a crocodile tear at just the right moment. He was a smooth operator, selling the story of a devoted son shattered by a freak accident. The Coast Guard had called off the search after 3 days. The official report was filed. Lost at sea, presumed deceased. It was all so neat and tidy. Sophie stood beside him, a wraith in black silk. She was his prop. Her genuine distress made his feigned sorrow all the more believable. She was pale, trembling, her eyes red-rimmed and vacant. She looked haunted, because she was. Every whispered word of sympathy was a fresh stab of guilt. The centerpiece of the performance was Michael's eulogy. He walked to the lectern, clutching a piece of paper his hands supposedly shook too much to read. He didn't need it. He had rehearsed. "My mother, Eleanor Hayes, was a force of nature," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "She was a titan in a world of men, a visionary who built an empire from the ground up. But to me, she was just Mom." He paused, letting out a choked sob that echoed through the silent cathedral. "She taught me everything. how to be strong, how to be resilient. The last thing we did together was celebrate. We were on the water, her favorite place in the world. She was happy. That's the memory I will hold on to. It was sickeningly perfect, a masterpiece of manipulation. But then a crack appeared in their carefully constructed facade. After the service, during the reception at my home, a small memorial table had been set up. On it was my favorite photograph, one of my late husband and me, taken on the very same yacht 20 years earlier. Sophie was standing near it, looking lost, when one of my oldest friends approached to offer a kind word. As Sophie turned, her elbow bumped the silver frame. It fell to the marble floor with a sickening crash. The glass shattered. A hush fell over the nearby guests. Sophie let out a small, horrified gasp and stared down at my smiling face, now fractured into a dozen pieces. It was too on the nose, too symbolic of what she had done. Michael was at her side in an instant. He didn't miss a beat. "It's all right, darling. It's just an accident," he said loudly for everyone to hear, wrapping an arm around her. But as he bent down to help her, Frank's contact, who was posing as a caterer, saw the look on his face. For a split second, the mask of the grieving son slipped, revealing a flash of pure, undiluted rage in his eyes. He was furious at her for her clumsiness, for this one unscripted moment in his perfect play. The next morning, with the scent of funeral lilies still clinging to the curtains of my house, Michael Hayes walked into my office at Hayes Properties. He sat in my chair, put his feet up on my desk, and began the process of taking over my life. He believed he had won. He had no idea the real ghost was just beginning to stir. The first thing I was aware of was the smell, not the cloying sweetness of funeral orchids, but the raw, clean scent of salt and old wood. The second was the sound of waves, not crashing over my head, but rolling gently against a nearby shore. I was lying on my back, a coarse wool blanket scratching my chin. I was alive. My eyes fluttered open. I wasn't in my silk-sheeted bed at the estate. I was in a rustic room with exposed wooden beams on the ceiling. I sat up, a wave of dizziness washing over me as the memory returned with the force of a physical blow. The setting sun, Sophie's terrified face, the shove, the shocking, paralyzing cold of the Atlantic. "Easy there." The voice was gruff, familiar. Frank was sitting in a worn leather armchair in the corner of the room, a laptop open on the table beside him. He looked as solid and immovable as the old lighthouse down the coast. "Frank," I rasped, my throat raw from salt water. "It worked." "Like a charm," he said, getting up and handing me a glass of water. "His boat was 10 miles out when your signal went active. I picked you up 2 miles from where you went in. You were lucky. The current was on our side." I drank the water, the cool liquid a balm to my throat. Lucky wasn't the word I would have chosen. Prepared, perhaps. Vindicated, certainly. "He didn't even look for me, did he?" I asked. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that I needed him to confirm. Frank didn't answer with words. He turned the laptop towards me. On the screen was a map of the Florida Keys. A red line tracked the path of the Eleanor heading out to sea. Then, a single red dot blinked where it had stopped. Another blue dot, Frank's boat, moved steadily towards it from the coastline. "The brooch never stopped transmitting," he said. "But that's not what you need to see." He clicked a file, the screen filled with video, grainy from being shot with a long-range lens from his boat, but perfectly, damnably clear. I saw myself standing at the railing. I saw Sophie approach. I saw the push. I saw my own body disappear over the side. I watched, my face impassive, as Michael screamed my name. I saw him rush to the side, looking down into the dark water. But Frank didn't stop the video there. He let it play. For 10 seconds, Michael played the part of the frantic son. Then he stopped. He stood up straight, his shoulders relaxing. The look of anguish on his face vanished, replaced by an expression of cold, flat appraisal. He looked at his watch. He said something to Sophie, who had collapsed onto the deck, and his tone wasn't comforting. It was impatient, commanding. He calmly turned back to the helm, started the engine, and turned the yacht back towards Miami, leaving his mother to die in the middle of the ocean. He had him. Frank had my son dead to rights. I watched the video twice without blinking. All the years of love, of pride, of sacrifice, all of it was a lie. The son I had raised, the man I had built an empire for, was a stranger, a monster wearing my child's face. Something inside me shifted. The deep, aching grief of a betrayed mother began to cool, to harden, to sharpen into something else entirely. It was the feeling of a forge, the pain burning away all the soft, useless parts of me, leaving only something cold and unbreakable. I looked at Frank. The tears I thought would come never did. They had been washed away in the Atlantic. My hands, which had been trembling, were now perfectly still. I curled them into fists, my nails digging into my palms, the small pain a welcome anchor in the storm. I was not a victim bobbing in the water. I was not a ghost to be mourned with fake tears and expensive flowers. I was the phoenix, and I had just risen from the ashes. "He's not just going to lose the money, Frank," I said, my voice low and steady, a stranger in my own throat. "He's going to lose everything." From the quiet solitude of Frank's beach house, I began to pull the strings. The first thread was the money. It was the reason my son had tried to murder me, and it would be the first instrument of his unraveling. The $1 million trust fund wasn't a gift. It was a cage, and the door had just slammed shut. Michael, of course, didn't know this yet. A week after my funeral, flush with false confidence, he and Sophie walked into the downtown branch of my private bank. Frank had an old contact behind the counter who gave him a full report. Michael was the picture of quiet dignity, the bereaved son forced to handle his late mother's affairs. He requested a full transfer of the trust's funds into his personal account. He was politely informed that the transaction was impossible. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes," the bank manager told him, his face a mask of professional sympathy. "But there's a flag on the account. A security freeze was placed on it by Mrs. Hayes herself, the day before her trip." According to Frank's contact, Michael's composure almost broke. For the first time, he hit a brick wall. He argued, then demanded, then made veiled threats about his legal prowess. But my instructions had been ironclad. The account was frozen, accessible to no one. He left the bank empty-handed, his perfect mask showing the first hairline cracks of fury. That failure sent a tremor through their new life, and nowhere were the vibrations felt more strongly than with Sophie. She was living in my house, sleeping in my son's bed, but she was a prisoner. My portrait watched her from the wall in the grand foyer. My scent lingered on the linens. She was haunted, and her guilt was eating her alive. She wasn't sleeping. Frank's surveillance, discreet cameras placed long ago under the guise of a security upgrade, showed her wandering the house at all hours of the night. She drank. She would stand on the terrace for an hour, staring at the dark water of the bay, her hands trembling. The life of freedom Michael had promised her felt more like a beautifully decorated prison cell. The walls were closing in. The breaking point came late one night, about 2 weeks after my death. Sophie was roaming the silent hallways, a glass of whiskey in her hand, when she heard Michael's voice coming from his study. The door was slightly ajar. She crept closer, drawn by his tone. It wasn't the gentle, soothing voice he used with her. It was cold, sharp, and commanding. He was on the phone. "The payment was final. The job is done," Michael said, his voice low and hard. "There's nothing else to discuss." Sophie froze, her blood turning to ice. She recognized the topic, if not the other voice. It had to be the blackmailer. But Michael didn't sound scared. He sounded like a boss scolding an employee. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "Don't be stupid," Michael snapped. "You got what you were promised. Don't get greedy. If you call this number again, you'll regret it. We're done." He hung up. The click echoed in the silent house. Sophie stood motionless in the darkness of the hallway, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The threatening text messages, the man in the coffee shop, the demand for $250,000. It was all a lie, a carefully staged play designed to push her over the edge. Michael wasn't protecting her from a blackmailer. He was the blackmailer. The ghost from her past hadn't found her by accident. It had been summoned by her own husband. In that moment, she finally understood. She wasn't his partner in crime. She was the weapon he had used to commit it. She was just a pawn in his game. And as that devastating truth settled in, the fear that had been her constant companion began to curdle into something new, something far more dangerous. Suspicion. Suspicion is a poison. Once it enters the bloodstream, it infects everything. For 3 days, Sophie lived with it, watching Michael with new, terrified eyes. Every kind word he spoke, every gentle touch, now felt like a calculated lie. She was living with a stranger, a man who had used her darkest secret to turn her into a weapon against his own mother. She needed proof. She needed to hear it from him. Her chance came on a Tuesday night. They were driving back from a dinner with one of Michael's law partners, a tedious affair where Michael had once again played the role of the grieving son with nauseating perfection. He was driving the Cadillac Escalade, the city lights of Miami blurring past the tinted windows. Michael pulled into a scenic overlook, a popular spot for tourists, but deserted at this late hour. He cut the engine. "I just need a minute," he said, rubbing his temples. That was exhausting. He got out of the car to take a call, leaving his laptop open on the center console. It was a careless, arrogant move. He saw her as a broken doll, too fragile and grief-stricken to be a threat. He was wrong. With her heart hammering against her ribs, Sophie reached over and clicked the trackpad. His email was open. It took her less than a minute. She went to the trash folder, her hands shaking so badly she could barely control the cursor. And there it was, a chain of deleted messages with an encrypted anonymous email address. The subject line was Denver. She read the first message, her breath catching in her throat. It was from Michael, sent a month ago. "The target is vulnerable but needs a strong push. Time to activate the asset." The reply, "The agreed-upon fee is $250,000. Half now, half upon completion." Sophie felt the world tilt. Asset. That's what he had called the blackmailer. The whole thing was a business transaction. She scrolled down, her horror mounting. She saw the bank transfer confirmation. She saw the final message, sent the day after I died. It was from Michael. "Job complete. Final payment sent. Delete this thread and lose this number." The car door opened, and Michael slid back into the driver's seat, a self-satisfied smile on his face. "Finally got rid of him," he said, ending his call. He looked at Sophie and his smile faltered. He followed her gaze down to the glowing screen of the laptop. The mask didn't just crack, it fell away completely. His face went cold. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You hired him," Sophie whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "There was no blackmailer. It was you. It was always you." Michael didn't deny it. He simply closed the laptop with a soft, final click. "You were in over your head, Sophie. You were a liability. I gave your little drama a purpose." "A purpose?" she repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. "You used my past to trick me into what was necessary," he finished for her, his tone chillingly calm. "My mother was never going to let go of the reins. She was going to keep me on a leash my entire life. That $1 million was just another test, another hoop for me to jump through. I was tired of playing the game by her rules, so I changed them." The confession was so blatant, so devoid of remorse, that it stole her breath. "And me? What was I in all this?" He finally turned to look at her, and there was nothing in his eyes but cold, hard calculation. You were the perfect tool, he said. Fragile, guilty, desperate. You played your part beautifully. You were the one who pushed her, after all. If things had gone south, who do you think they would have believed? The grieving son, or the unstable wife with a secret? The truth of it hit her with the force of a physical blow. He had set her up from the very beginning. She wasn't just a pawn. She was the scapegoat, the fall guy if his perfect plan went wrong. The love, the promises of a new life, the comforting words, all of it was an act. She started to sob, deep, ragged sounds of a heart breaking. The man she loved didn't exist. He had never existed. Michael simply started the car, his expression one of mild annoyance. Pull yourself together, Sophie, he said, putting the Escalade in drive. You got what you wanted. We're free. Don't ruin it by being hysterical. The living room of Frank's beach house had become my war room. The coffee table was littered with blueprints of my estate, timelines, and financial statements. On a large monitor connected to his laptop, a dozen small windows showed live feeds from every key room in my house. We watched them live their lives in my home, a grotesque parody of the family they had pretended to be. We watched Michael take command of my study and Sophie drink herself into a stupor on my terrace. We were the ghosts in their machine, and the net was slowly closing around them. She knows, I said, pointing to a feed from the master bedroom. Sophie was packing a suitcase, her movements frantic and clumsy. Michael was standing in the doorway, blocking her exit. She knows he used her. The confrontation in the car did it, Frank said, not looking up from a different screen where he was tracking a cell phone signal. She's a cornered rat, unpredictable. She won't leave, I said with certainty. He won't let his star witness walk off the stage, but her panic is useful. It will make him careless. The next phase of the plan required a more hands-on approach. The blackmailer, the asset my son had hired, was the final piece of the puzzle. His name was Leo, a low-level private investigator with a gambling problem and a flexible moral code. Frank found him at a cheap motel off the interstate. They brought him to the beach house after dark, his head covered with a black hood. When Frank pulled it off, Leo blinked in the dim light, his eyes wide with terror. Then he saw me, sitting in the armchair across from him, and his fear turned to utter disbelief. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. That's not possible, he stammered, looking from me to Frank and back again. You're dead. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, I said, my voice as calm as the still night air. But yours don't have to be. Frank placed a folder on the table between us. Leo, he said, his voice a low growl. We know about the hit and run in Denver, the real one, that is, the one you covered up for a city councilman back in the day. We also know about your bookie, your offshore accounts, and the fact that you haven't paid taxes in 6 years. We have you dead to rights on at least 4 federal charges. Leo swallowed hard, his face pale. Or, I continued, leaning forward, you can help me. You can tell me everything Michael Hayes told you. You can give me every piece of correspondence, every recorded call, every bank transfer. You will sing like a canary, and in return, all of this goes away. You get a clean slate. It wasn't a choice. It was a command. He spent the next 2 hours telling us everything, his initial bravado melting away into a desperate desire to save his own skin. By the time he was finished, I had it all. The final, undeniable proof that Michael was the architect of the entire conspiracy. After Frank led the terrified man away, he returned to the living room. He'll cooperate, he said. What's the next move? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, placid ocean. For weeks, I had been a ghost, a shadow watching from the sidelines. Now it was time for the haunting to begin. The time for hiding was over. The time for retribution was at hand. The annual Hayes Foundation Charity Gala is in 3 days, I said, my reflection a pale outline against the black glass. It's always held at the house. Frank nodded. understanding immediately. A big crowd. Lots of witnesses. No, I said, turning to face him. Not this year. This year, Michael will cancel the gala. He'll tell the staff to take the night off. He'll think it's his decision, a sign of respect for his grieving period. I had already planted the seed of that idea via a fake email from his PR team. He and Sophie will be in the house, alone, I continued, the plan laid out in my mind like a chessboard. And they will receive a message from the housekeeper that a special dinner has been prepared for them. A family dinner. A cold smile touched my lips for the first time in a month. It felt foreign. It's time for me to go home, Frank. It's time for the Last Supper. The air in my house was toxic. From my vantage point in the dining room, I could hear their voices echoing down the marble hallway, sharp and ugly. The argument had been escalating for the past hour. The cracks in their facade had finally shattered, and the poison was pouring out. I can't do this anymore, Michael. Sophie's voice was shrill, hysterical. Living in this house, seeing her face everywhere, and the money is gone. The bank won't release it. Your whole plan was for nothing. Get a grip, Sophie. Michael's voice was a low snarl, stripped of all its practiced charm. It's a temporary setback, a legal snag. I'll handle it. Handle it? That's what you always say? She shrieked. You handled the blackmailer, didn't you? You handled everything. You handled me. I'm at the end of my rope, do you hear me? I'm going to the police. There was a sharp slapping sound, followed by a choked gasp. It was the sound I had been waiting for, the sound of him losing control completely. You will do nothing, he hissed, his voice dangerously quiet. You are as much a part of this as I am. Don't you ever forget that. Now, you are going to go upstairs, wash your face, and act like the loving wife you're supposed to be. We are not throwing this all away because you've lost your nerve. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Sophie's ragged sobs. Right on cue, my housekeeper, Maria, stepped into the hallway. She has been with me for 30 years. Her loyalty is to me, and me alone. Her face was a placid, unreadable mask. Sir, madam, she said, her voice perfectly even. Dinner is served. I heard Michael let out an exasperated sigh. Maria, I told you we weren't having guests. I canceled the gala. You were supposed to take the night off. My apologies, sir, Maria said, her tone unwavering. Mrs. Hayes was very specific about tonight's arrangements. She insisted. The past tense was a beautiful, subtle touch. Michael and Sophie were too wrapped up in their own drama to notice the slip. Fine, Michael snapped. Whatever. We'll be there in a minute. I heard their footsteps approaching, slow and reluctant. They were walking into the lion's den, and they didn't even know it. The grand dining room doors, which were usually left open, had been closed. Michael pushed one open, his irritation clear in the aggressive movement. They stopped dead in the doorway. The room was dimly lit, just a few candles flickering on the long mahogany table. The table was set for 3, and at its head, in the high-backed chair that had always been mine, I sat waiting. I was wearing a simple black dress. In front of me was a single plate and a glass of deep, blood-red Cabernet. I raised the glass to my lips, took a slow, deliberate sip, and then placed it back on the table with a soft click. I looked at them, my 2 betrayers, and offered them a small, serene smile. Time seemed to stop. Michael's face, which had been a mask of fury, was now completely blank with shock. His jaw was slack, his eyes wide with a dawning animal terror. He looked at me as if I were an apparition, a specter his guilty conscience had conjured from the depths of the ocean. But it was Sophie's reaction that was the most satisfying. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream that died in her throat. She was holding a wine glass, one she must have grabbed from the bar in the living room. Her trembling hand lost its grip. The glass fell to the floor, shattering on the marble. The red wine splashed across the pristine white tiles like a spray of fresh blood. a perfect stain, a perfect omen for the dinner that was about to begin. They stood frozen in the doorway, two statues carved from fear, the shattered glass and spilled wine a fitting tribute at their feet. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, letting them suffocate in it. I wanted them to truly comprehend the impossibility of what they were seeing. Finally, Michael found his voice, a strangled, disbelieving whisper. "Mom, it can't be." "Sit down, Michael," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. It was not a request. He and Sophie stumbled to the table, moving like marionettes whose strings had been cut. They took their usual seats, their eyes never leaving my face. "You're probably wondering how I'm here," I began, swirling the wine in my glass. "The truth is, I never fully trusted you, Michael. I saw the greed in your eyes. So, I took precautions." I gestured to the large, ornate painting on the far wall. With a soft whir, it retracted into the ceiling, revealing a large, flat-screen monitor. "Let's start with a home movie, shall we?" I pressed a button on a small remote. The screen flickered to life, showing the grainy, long-distance footage from Frank's boat. They watched in horror as the entire scene played out again. Sophie's pathetic apology, the push, my body falling into the water. But this time, they saw what happened next. They saw Michael's 10-second performance of grief, followed by his cold, immediate turn back to the helm. They saw him leave me for dead. Sophie let out a low, wounded moan, covering her face with her hands. Michael just stared, his face ashen. The writing was on the wall, and he was finally reading it. "Of course, a video isn't everything," I continued, my voice conversational. "It lacks context. For that, we need audio." I pressed another button. The room filled with the sound of Michael's voice from his study, cold and hard, speaking to the blackmailer. "The job is done. Don't get greedy. We're done." Sophie flinched as if she'd been struck again. Michael's eyes darted towards the door, a cornered animal looking for an escape that wasn't there. "It seems the ghost from Sophie's past was a bit more manufactured than she believed," I said, looking at my daughter-in-law. "Your husband painted you into a corner, my dear. He needed a pawn. And every good case needs a star witness," I added, just as the dining room doors swung open again. Frank stepped inside, his large frame filling the doorway. Beside him, looking terrified and small, was Leo, the blackmailer. The jig was up. Michael's composure finally, completely shattered. "What is this?" he stammered. "What do you want?" "What I want," I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper, "is justice, and I'm going to give you a choice." I slid 2 stacks of documents across the polished table. "Option 1, I said, tapping the first stack. "This is a full, signed confession from our friend Leo here. It's accompanied by the video, the audio recordings, and bank statements detailing your payments to him. I will hand this entire package to the district attorney in the morning. You'll both be charged with conspiracy and attempted murder. You will spend the best years of your lives in prison." I let that sink in before tapping the second stack of papers. Or option 2. These are legal documents, drawn up by my real lawyers. You will sign them right now. You will relinquish any and all claim to my estate, my company, and the Hayes family name. You will cede all your shares and trust funds to a charity for victims of violent crime. You will walk out of this house tonight with nothing but the clothes on your backs, and you will disappear from my life forever. Sophie was sobbing openly now. Michael stared at the papers, his mind racing, looking for an angle, a loophole, a way out. There was none. It was checkmate. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking with a rage that made him tremble. He signed, his signature an angry black slash on the page. He shoved the papers towards Sophie. Through her tears, she signed as well. I took the documents, reviewed them, and gave a slight nod to Frank. He escorted a whimpering Leo from the room. I stood up and looked down at the 2 people who had destroyed my family. "Your dinner is getting cold," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. Finish it, and then leave my house forever. I turned and walked out, leaving them to their last supper. I didn't look back. I went to the terrace, the cool night air a welcome relief. Alone under the stars, I raised my glass. I had lost a son, but I had reclaimed my life. The power was mine, absolute and solitary. And in the profound, deafening silence, I took a sip of my wine. It tasted like victory. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.